generations of priests, generations of artists have taken away her character and her good name. And they've done this by portraying her as a prostitute. Now, it's very clear from the Gospels that prostitutes were welcome in the company of Jesus. It was one of the criticisms that people made of him, that he kept bad company. But there's no evidence, absolutely no evidence in the Gospel to suggest that Mary of Magdala was a prostitute. That whatever she was, and we know very little about her, whatever she wasn't a prostitute. Both Gerard Majella and Mary of Magdala suffered from bad health. We're told in the Gospels how Jesus cast 7 demons out of Mary of Magdala. And we need to be very careful about how we understand demons when they're presented to us in the Gospels, because it doesn't always mean demonic or diabolical possession. People then had much less understanding of human nature than we have today. They knew very little about nervous breakdown, mental illness, emotional instability. So Mary of Magdala might have had a breakdown, might have been emotionally distressed, might have been mentally unstable. We don't know. But what we do know is that Jesus healed her. And there's something very comforting in this, because it tells us that not only did Jesus heal people, but that those whom he healed were welcome in the company of his followers, and that the healed could take on leadership roles, prominent leadership roles in the community of the followers of Jesus. Gerard Majella also suffered intensely from bad health. He lived in hard times. Grew up in poverty, lived in poverty, died in poverty, was not very well nourished as he grew up, and he developed tuberculosis. Now that was before penicillin, before antibiotics, before painkillers, so you can only imagine how much he suffered. But Gerard was committed to living his life as a follower of Jesus, gratefully, graciously, and joyfully. So he tried and succeeded to live his suffering joyfully, gratefully, and graciously. So Mary and Gerard were outsiders who followed Jesus in unusual circumstances, both of whom lost their good names, both of whom suffered from bad health. They also share another characteristic in that they were devoted to the care of others. We've seen already how Mary belonged to a little group of women who were dedicated not just to following Jesus, but to supporting Jesus and to funding Jesus. And Mary's following of Jesus led her to stand at the foot of the cross. She was one of the few people, we remember the story, she was one of the very few people who remained faithful to the very end. And in today's Gospel, she's the only one who remains at the tomb. And she's the one then who witnesses the resurrection. So she belonged to this little itinerant community, a community of preachers. Gerard Majella, when he joined the Redemptorists, also joined a small community of preachers, an itinerant community that travelled from place to place in the south of Italy, preaching the gospel, trying to draw people back to a loving God. He was a brother in the community, which meant that he was responsible for the material needs of the community. He cooked, he cleaned, he shopped. He did the domestic work. The community was very poor, so often Gerard had to go and beg so as to be able to provide the community with the food that it needed. And he was very generous, that no matter how poor the community was, there were always people who were poorer than the Redemptorists, and Gerard was always willing to share what the Redemptorists had with them. There's a story how on one particular Friday he was given some money and he was sent to the market to buy fish. On his way to the market, he met a man who was making his livelihood by selling matches. means of support. Now, Gerard was generous, but he was also impetuous and impulsive. So he bought all the matches. So the Redemptorists had a plentiful supply of matches, but no lunch. So you can imagine how popular Gerard was with his brothers on that particular day. Mary of Magdala was the first witness to the resurrection of Jesus. We saw that in the Gospel this evening. Now this was both unusual and significant, because women had little standing in Jewish law, and the word of a woman would never be taken against the word of a man in a Jewish court at the time. So when Jesus chose Mary to be the first witness to the resurrection, he did a very significant thing, and he broke through a lot of the cultural prejudices and the cultural barriers of his time. So Mary was the first witness, and it was Mary who went to tell the apostles that Jesus had risen from the dead. Belief in the resurrection is central to our Christian faith. A belief in the resurrection of Jesus and a belief in the promise of our own resurrection. We profess, I believe in the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Now, believing in the resurrection of the dead and in the life of the world to come isn't just about believing what's going to happen to us after we die. It obviously involves what's going to happen to us after we die. But eternal life isn't just for after death. Eternal life is something that we're invited to know. We're invited as followers of Jesus to live eternal life. And we live eternal life by living lives of love, and that was what Gerard Majella did. Gerard knew that people needed more than food to survive, that they needed hope as well. He lived, as I've been saying, in hard times, and there were frequent famines in Italy, in the south of Italy, when Gerard was a Redemptorist. During one of these famines, the people came to the Redemptorist monastery at Mater Domini, where Gerard lived, looking for food. And Gerard shared the community's food with them. But the people were still quite despondent. So the next thing Gerard did was he lit a fire, so that the people could gather around the fire, and you can almost see a little community forming there. And he then asked if anybody had some musical instruments, and they discovered that there were people in the group who had musical instruments, so Gerard encouraged them to begin to play. So first the food, then the fire, now the music. You can see the community gathering, and you can see how Gerard was putting heart and spirit back into these hungry and oppressed people. And the next thing we know is that Gerard, impetuous and impulsive as he was, is dancing on the street. And there's a picture in our church in Mater Domini of Gerard Majella surrounded by these people, sitting at the fire, playing their music, and there Gerard is dancing away. So I want to leave you with two images as we bring our novena to a close this year. I want to leave you with an image of Mary of Magdala as a lady preacher, and I want to leave you with an image of Gerard Majella as a dancing